Okay, here we go. All right. All right, everyone. Here we go. So I'm Lindsey Rinehart. This is our session entitled Coaching, Collaboration, and Escalation, looking at supervisors' roles in problem solving. And so we really are going to just have kind of an introduction now before we go into a panel. And so what we're hoping to cover today are first just kind of looking at like what are some normal problems that occur in field placements. We're going to spend some time on our school's five-phase problem solving process. We're going to look a little bit about kind of how do we decide when problem solving escalation is necessary? How do we do this? And then really just looking at, how do we collaborate and problem solve effectively? And how does this kind of contribute to professional growth and ethical practice? So here we go. So breaking news, not all internships are great. If we have been supervising students for a while, we have learned this. It is my deep hope that this is never somebody's first experience, but sometimes it is. So really just kind of looking at, reasons for this. Many internships are great, but there's little bumps that can happen along the way. And some of the things that tend to come up, sometimes we have really just kind of a mismatch between the student and the site or the student and the supervisor. And, this isn't necessarily anybody's fault, and some of this can happen, through a matching process, or maybe the supervisor gets changed, or maybe the interview process doesn't allow, the specific student and the specific supervisor to get to know each other and determine that fit. But sometimes it just, maybe there's a mismatch in expectations. And sometimes, right, like there is a lack of student preparedness. So these are some of the common things that we have that can get in the way. And also want to kind of state as we go through this today, we're really going to try to be intentional about looking at problems that occur from all sides. Problems usually fall somewhere in the middle. When I'm hearing from a student and from an agency, really kind of trying to figure out what's going on. And so we use the same approach, whether it is a student bringing up a challenge with their agency or whether it's a supervisor bringing up a challenge with their student. And so we'll try to talk about problems from both of those angles today. So first, just kind of wanted to open this up and feel free to use the chat here. What is a problem? What are some of the things that you all have seen as you have worked with students? Are there common problems that you have encountered? And I'll expand, but wanted to kind of give some space. Lack of professionalism is certainly a big one that we see from our end. Not showing up at an internship kind of ties back there as well. And I will say, like, when I start my year with students, I often tell them, like, when things go wrong, it's usually around professionalism, which is something that hopefully you have some ability to kind of control. Yep, this disconnect between expectations of the student and the supervisor is a good one. And so feel free. Yes, not ready for those specific skills. And sometimes this happens in that advanced level, maybe feeling like maybe they didn't get the skills they needed in their foundation level or they weren't prepared. And feel free to keep adding things there. As I kind of pull us over to our next slide, these are a lot of the common problems that have come up. That's a really good one, Laura. Just kind of things in personal life that are coming up and getting in the way. And unfortunately, I think that's something we really seen an increase of in recent years. So that's a really important one. So yes, I mean, we see this show up, sometimes in this tardiness and absenteeism. There can be a lack of initiative, maybe students that are doing kind of just what you tell them to, but not kind of bringing their own ideas to the table. There can be a lack of skills. There can be unethical behavior. One of the really challenging ones can be this kind of inability to accept feedback. If it seems like a student is kind of stuck and not feeling like they are wanting to learn or presenting in a way that seems like they are wanting to learn. There can be poor boundaries that open to feedback. I have that on there twice. I think that is a really challenging one. So again, these are kind of some of the common things that when we see problems, these are common ones that we see. And you've got great other other things that you're bringing up in the chat. And so again, to kind of address this both from like what problems are we seeing with students, but also to get kind of give that perspective, like what are some of the things that students bring up when they're coming to us with problems in their placement? What are some of the things that they are encountering? And so, common ones are kind of a lack of orientation, maybe just kind of being thrown in without a lot of guidance. There can be a lack of supervision, or that, they're supposed to get, at least that hour of educational supervision every week. If that isn't happening, or it's getting canceled, or maybe their supervisor isn't feeling very engaged when they're in those supervision. Like these are some of the things that we hear. Sometimes there's unclear expectations or just a lack of things to do. That can be a really big challenge if there's not enough for them to do. Um, these other ones kind of looking at this kind of limited room to ask questions or incorporate course concepts. I mean, we really encourage our students to kind of be taking initiative and going into their agencies and asking why. I'm learning about this, why I see we're doing it like that. And there's really great ways to ask that in a way that is respectful and professional. And they can present new ideas. And you might not be able to incorporate their ideas, or there might be very good reasons why, why what you're doing works and what they're suggesting wouldn't work. But giving them that space to kind of talk through is really important. And so I think one of the things I like to emphasize to students a lot is that like being told no to something doesn't mean you shouldn't have asked the question. It's okay to ask a question or make a suggestion and being told like, hey, no, we can't do this, but like, thanks for bringing up this idea. And so I think with that room to ask questions, certainly no expectation that you are kind of letting them, implement every idea that they bring, but encouraging them to have space for that, and to have that learner space. And so I think those two kind of go hand in hand there. I will also say, we do a survey every year with our students at the end of their internships and ask them kind of just some satisfaction questions about their internship and experience. One of the strongest indicators that goes, with overall satisfaction of internship is whether or not they felt that their supervisor valued their learning contract. And so that's a really big one, just, that value of the supervisor in valuing their learning space. So again, these are kind of the problems we're seeing on that side. So next, kind of transitioning to like, what do we do about these? How do we go about problem solving? And so first, just kind of this general concept of having a problem solving approach. I really like to connect a lot of the things that we do with student learners as, connecting them to core social work skills. Problem solving is a core social work skill. I don't know about you, but I have often joked about my profession that I'm a professional problem solver. This is what I do. I solve problems all the time in all sorts of ways. And so do you kind of have a standard approach or a way that you go about addressing problems? Like when you encounter something, like how do you kind of identify it? How do you know how to make those decisions? And so, I encourage you to kind of think about like, what is your general approach to problem solving and how can you model this for students because they will throughout their careers need to deal with different sorts of problems. So we want to have kind of a fallback, a go-to to deal with things. And so in looking at how we want to structure this with our student in their internships, we use this 5-phase problem-solving approach. This really kind of comes from this social work concept of escalate as necessary. Really just kind of let's go up each step as we need to. We don't need to kind of be reactive and jump ahead of things. And so this very first stage, which sometimes we don't even know we're in this first stage when we're in it, is just kind of recognizing like, hey, something's going on. We need to have a conversation. So this step one, having a direct conversation between student and supervisor, if this fixes whatever the issue is, again, nobody might even know that they're dealing with the problem. We're just having a direct conversation. But this is always where we want to start. So if a student comes to me to share something, that's one of the things I'm going to ask right away is, have you talked to your supervisor about this yet? And if not, I'm going to encourage them to go have that conversation directly, and then we can talk more. But until that conversation has happened, there's really not much else for me to do. So that's the first step. Then, if you've had that conversation and things are still not improving, then that's a great time to pull in the field faculty liaison. And so again, talking to you as supervisors, this is what we're here for as liaisons. And I think sometimes there's a feeling of like not wanting to bother us and being able to handle things yourselves, but we would rather know. So if you have addressed something and it's not quite fixing, please let us know and we can kind of discuss it with you. And so at this stage too, again, we're going to ask you, have you already talked with them about it? Okay, great. We can kind of give you some context, maybe brainstorm some solutions, and then encourage you to go have another direct conversation with the student about it. Again, a lot of times that fixes things, but if not, then we kind of escalate, and then we can have a meeting that would include the student, the supervisor, and the field faculty liaison, where we all meet together, we talk about things, we kind of acknowledge this has come up before and we haven't fixed it yet, so we're going to come up with a specific plan. We're going to create a plan, we're going to give it kind of a check-in date. I've been using 2 weeks a lot, but all of these scenarios are different. We're going to come up with a plan. We're going to give it a check-in date. At that point, the field faculty liaison is always going to notify me as the field director, just so that I know something's brewing over there. We may have to deal with it further at some point, but hopefully we fix the problem, but we'll have that 2-week check-in. And at that point in time, if things are still not smoothed out, then we're going to have another meeting that's a bit more serious. I will attend this meeting as the field director, where again, we'll kind of outline where we've gone and how we've gotten here. We'll make, again, a very specific plan with the check-in date. We'll notify the program director. And, I always make a point of telling, again, I'm talking about this as though it's a student issue, but it can come the other way too. But, we're going to say in that meeting, if we have to meet again, we're probably talking about termination, so that if we get to that termination meeting, we don't want anyone to be surprised. So we have that stage 4 meeting. Again, maybe we fix things and it's gone, but if not, then we have this phase 5 meeting, which is typically a termination of the placement. So there is a handout that I shared that kind of goes through this problem solving process in a little bit more detail. So a couple things that are important to consider are timeliness of intervention. So as we know, it's easier to fix a small problem than a large one. So, really encouraging people to bring these problems up early on with their field faculty liaison, so we can make sure that we're following this process. We can keep things from escalating. We can keep feelings from festering. And again, this is an opportunity for teaching. If we are showing students that we can address things kind of head on rather than avoiding, this is a good practice in how we go forward. Next, I want to just talk briefly about the importance of documentation. As social workers, we know how important it is to document what happened. So I do encourage you, if you don't regularly take supervision notes, it's a good idea to do so. You never know when you might need to go back to them. So good practice to take notes on your supervision in general. But certainly if you are having a conversation where you're addressing something that is at all a problem, it's really important to make a note of that so that we kind of have a record that this was addressed. And then if you're having any of these kind of specific problem solving conversations, to send a follow-up email, or as somebody else suggested, ask the student to send a follow-up email. You can do it that way too, but that way there's a documentation of what happened. You can both make sure that you're on the same page about it. So again, that kind of adds to our documentation record. If we've made any specific agreements, we want documentation of that. And the other thing I really want to emphasize is that if you are dealing with any challenges or you have concerns, that should reflect in the midterm assessment. If you haven't done the midterm assessment already, it should reflect in there. Even if you fix the problem, you still might want to just kind of have a note about it. One of the things that happens sometimes is that supervisors come to us kind of after the midterm and tell us about a problem that's been going on, and we go back to the midterm and it's like, oh, it looks like everything was great. And so it's harder to know, like, yes, the student has known there's a challenge, we are trying to address it. So it's really helpful if the midterm kind of reflects your concerns at that point in time. I want to give you a little bit of information about what does happen if a student is terminated from a placement, or if a placement is terminated, just so we kind of know that what if. We try to avoid this by going through all these phases, but sometimes we do get there. So we typically would ask you as a supervisor to complete a final assessment of the student, just to kind of let us know where were they in their competencies at the time that this placement ended. That kind of helps us figure out where we're going from here. We will ask that you are able to kind of share with us documentation. It's really helpful for us to know like what was addressed with the student and when, so we can kind of see what that looked like. And then one of the things that we do as a school when a placement is terminated, is have an academic review meeting. And again, this is something that's happening if we're terminating a placement for student challenges. If it comes about from the agency, we might deal with it differently. But we have this academic review. We invite our MSW committee. The student has a chance to come and talk about what happened from their perspective. They are welcome to bring a support person with them. We really try to emphasize it's not meant to be a punitive meeting, but it is a space to just kind of talk about what happened, and it allows a committee to kind of help make a decision about what happens next. And so, this can be anything from quickly replacing the student in a different agency that semester so that they can kind of continue on as planned. Sometimes they might need to withdraw from field for that year and try again a different year. And in very serious circumstances, they could be dismissed from the program. That doesn't tend to happen unless there are like gross ethical violations. And so I think just in this fear of like, I don't want to harm the student, we really try to always keep the student's best interest in mind, but balance that with also keeping clients' best interest in mind. But I guess I will say very rarely is one termination from a placement leading to a student being dismissed from the program altogether, again, unless there are really significant ethical concerns. So that's kind of my setup for what our approach is. And now I want to introduce our panel of speakers today. So we have a few of our field instructors. So I have Beth Tchaikovsky, who has been both an internal and external field instructor for many of our students for several years. Jamie Messer, who many of you know, works on our field team and is often a field faculty liaison, so she's going to speak from that perspective. Katie Root is here as an MSW student who's going to be able to kind of share what this is like from a student perspective. And then Jenny Woodworth is also a field instructor, and Jenny in particular supervises students in a remote placement, and so I think that adds a specific element to it as well. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can see each other a little bit better. Maybe. Let's see. I don't know why I'm having trouble with this today.
I got it, Lindsay. I helped you
Okay,
out.
thanks. I keep pressing the wrong buttons.
It's very different. Zoom is very different today.
It looks different today.
Yeah.
All right, so let me get my panelist questions here. And so to start off, I'm going to start with Beth. And wanted to ask you, Beth, how do you recognize when a problem is emerging with a student, and what are maybe some of the early signs that you look for?
That's a great question. So I've been both an on-site and external field instructor for many years. It's much easier when I'm in the building with them, seeing them almost every day, talking with their colleagues and other people who might be assigning them work. It's much more difficult when they are external and we're only meeting by Zoom once a week. So what I notice with that is maybe lack of preparedness for supervision, lack of bringing coursework into supervision, wanting the supervision to end early, not showing up for supervision, frequently rescheduling supervision, or I also notice it's a red flag when they're overly optimistic. Everything's great. And then when I ask kind of, what's great, what are you really proud that you were able to do this week? There's like no answer. So not having a lot of information is a red flag for me.
Thank you. And I will mention to all of you that I will save space for us later on for any of you to ask questions to our panelists. You're welcome to put them in the chat in the meantime or save them for the end, but I wanted to tell you that I will give space for that. Next, I wanted to ask Jenny, kind of the same question, how do you recognize a problem emerging with a student, early signs, but also, how does this maybe look differently when doing this remotely?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay, for asking, and thanks to the School of Social Work for asking me to be here. So I this is a roundabout way of saying of answering this question. I do a lot of what I'd call preventative work in the beginning to set up a relationship for success, especially since, like Beth was talking about, I we have 1 hour on Zoom a week. Of course, we interface during the week, but like for our specific supervision and problem solving, I've never met any of these interns so far from WVU in person. So we spend some time in the beginning just really setting up like what a successful internship relationship, especially remotely, looks like for me, will look like for them. And I come back to like, how are we going to solve problems together? What does that look like for you in maybe your personal life and your schoolwork thus far? What is your experience problem solving remotely when you can't just like peek over a cubicle somewhere? Like, what is that going to look like? And also talking about like access to me. Like if they have to start problem solving, what does that look like? I don't want to text at 8 p.m., but you don't have to save it for our hour each week. I'm available to you within these constraints. And I really think like, and I'm going to say set up for success a lot. I really think that sets up for success. As far as signs, I really think Beth hit a lot of them, but that change in demeanor, hard over Zoom sometimes, but it's the same thing if I was working with a client. If I noticed, a behavior that was either, again, overly enthusiastic when they were, kind of, not having those expressions or vice versa. Like that change is a sign I'd look for. And again, absence from daily tasks, also hard remotely, and tardiness or absence to online meetings, of course, are going to be signs that I also look for.
Thank you. And then Jamie, from the field faculty liaison perspective, when concerns are brought to you, what helps you assess kind of the seriousness of a problem?
Yeah, so I want to kind of piggyback and answer a little bit, though, sometimes even where they talked about where they see problems. I sometimes see the problems too when students, right, or first of all, with their timesheets. So they might have had a lot of hours at one point. Now the hours have gotten smaller. So I'm like, are you not having opportunities or are you not going, right? Or what is that shift? But also seeing from students who are really not putting supervision on their timesheet, right? And again, what is that issue? Is it that you're not engaged in it or it's not being offered to you? And then the other thing is just for all of the supervisors, the students do a reflection for us as field faculty liaisons in class. And I know you all don't see it, but sometimes they'll write things in there. And as Jenny had talked about their tone, right? If I have seen kind of month to month that they're happy about placement and then all of a sudden everything's terrible, something has shifted, right? And so it's having a conversation, and it could be that they just didn't want to do the reflection that month or kind of not. Um, for me, I think the seriousness is right, really when, I think, and I will say this, I feel like I have students who reach out to me more as a faculty field liaison than I do the agencies to tell me about students. So when the student reaches out to me, I'll be honest, it's always a crisis for them. And part of that crisis is that they just don't know how to deal with it, or they're afraid to have that discussion. Um, I shared with Lindsay, I have a student right now who's having an issue and kind of talking to it. One of the things that has really come to my forefront is that students are afraid of having difficult conversations and they see an issue in placement automatically as a difficult conversation. So we need to really work to help them with that. So again, I think the seriousness is really once I talk with the student and see, have they approached this at all? And if they haven't, like what is their ability to approach it? And if they have no ability to approach it, then there probably is really a problem, right, that we need to solve. But if they can go back and then come back and work through it, and then I think there are just certain things, that are those ethical things. They're automatically a serious problem, right? And if someone is reaching out, then that's where we really need to address that. So for me, that's kind of where I see that issue.
And then Katie, and again, feel free to respond to any things that the other panelists have said, but also kind of in your student experience, what makes you realize that something is becoming a problem that you need to address?
So, like the problem that I encountered last semester with mine, it wasn't something that kind of like brewed. It was just something that literally popped up. And I will say, like what Jamie said, to me, it was a crisis. And so I did reach out to her first just because I didn't know how to handle it because I was employment based as well. So that just added another layer in. So, um, but I think like now in a different placement, like just being aware again, like tone of the supervisor or tone of if there's other students, um, but the specific one, it was just to me, it was something big and it popped up. And I was like, I'm the type of person where I'd rather just address it right away and try to get it figured out. And then if we can't, then we can't. But just paying attention as a student and not just showing up to show up to get your hours, but pay attention to what they're asking you to do too. If it's within the guidelines of what we can do as students or can't do, and just being open and honest about everything.
Thank you. And so my next question, I'm going to pose this to all four of you, but we'll go one at a time. Kind of expanding on, you talked a little bit about kind of some of the things you do to set up for success, Jenny, and how do we prevent problems and how do we identify them? But then thinking like, okay, once we've recognized that there is something going on, how do you kind of decide when it's time to address this maybe more specifically, and what strategies do you use to kind of keep things at maybe the lowest phase or from kind of escalating? So I'll start with you, Beth.
So my personal style is to just be really direct, and maybe that's not a personal style that always feels good to a student, but I am pretty much an open book. I'm really transparent, and so if I see something that I'm not sure is a problem, I'm just going to ask, "Hey, how's everything going? I noticed XYZ. Do you have any concerns that we can talk about? Is there anything that I can do to help you?" And if it still is not improving, then I might look for feedback from other folks that are involved with the students. So because I'm now external, in the past, I've had some email conversations or phone conversations with their on-site supervisor just to see, do you, do you see any concerns? How are things going for you? Um, and then we try and meet to support the student and see if there's anything that we can do to help them be successful. So I hope that answered your question. I think I might have veered off a little bit.
That that is helpful. Um, yeah, let's go to you, Jenny.
Sure. I hope I do this question justice as well. I think one of the things, again, as far as coming back to setting up our relationship is giving permission to, to not know it all, including how to have hard conversations. That we're both lucky to be in this tiny little, again, it's a Zoom screen for us, but that they'll have this space to practice problem solving, hard conversations, asking for what you need, boundaries, and that I offer myself as that person they can practice all those things with. It easier said than done because again, as I think Jamie was talking about, having hard conversations is not a life skill we're often taught, where we fumble through it, but allowing that fumble and telling folks that, hey, this is where it's going to happen. As far as I think you asked about repeated-ish challenges, is that correct? Again, I feel like I'm losing the question a little bit.
Yeah, like how do you try to mitigate the problem from getting out of hand, I guess is.
Okay. I in the past I've kind of ended supervision with, "Hey, last time we mentioned this, how are you feeling about this problem?" And really again using that direct language that Beth talks about, and then just, almost like a check-in point of like, here's our agenda. We're going to come back to the tardiness, or we're going to come back to whatever the specific problem is, and keeping them informed that, I'm going to keep my, that 2 weeks that you were talking about, Lindsay, before that, for 2 sessions, we're gonna talk about this and just see where you are, and give my own feedback on that.
Thanks. And we'll go to you, Jamie.
So I want to say, right, when the student brings a problem to me, we always talk through and problem solve. And then I really talk to them about empowerment of themselves, right? Where do they feel comfortable and how do they feel comfortable having this? But I also like say to them, like, I'm happy to join in the conversation, knowing though that this is escalating the problem. And do they want to go to that point or not? So being a support, but also understanding like what my role is in that, because I think that sometimes too, um, role clarification for students becomes very confusing. And I will say probably more so for me because I do have them in so many different capacities at time. But I think really again, like understanding, and I talk about this a lot for even my students who are employment based, right? Of who they have the certain issues with, if it's their employment issue, who they talk with, right? And really understanding who do they go to with what problem, I think is really important to also help them drive where it gets escalated and when it gets escalated.
And then Katie, I know, coming at this from a different angle, but still kind of the same. Like, how do you kind of determine it's time to escalate things or keep things from escalating? How do you handle that?
Um, I think to me, like depending on what the issue is like if it needs to be escalated. Last semester, it to me needed to be escalated and ultimately ended placement and went to a new one this semester. So it was the right direction. But I think because of that big picture, it's helped me realize that like now, like, okay, this is something small, this is fine, you can get through it compared to other things, you know. So just understanding what's a crisis and what needs to be addressed and what might just be you having a bad day or your supervisor having a bad day and just like starting over the next day, you know.
Thanks. So now I want to talk a little bit about kind of this tension between, we've talked about like this fear, like, fear of what might happen next, what could happen, and also kind of our accountability to protect clients. So there's a little bit of a rub there as we want students to have space to make mistakes, and also we need to protect vulnerable clients. So let's see, Jenny, I'm going to start with you this time, and Beth, I'm going to ask you the same question just so you can be thinking as well. Really, just kind of how do you balance that accountability with support, and when might you need to draw the line to protect a client?
This is the gatekeeping question. Thanks, Lindsay. So again, I am setting up for success, but not for ease. I make that pretty clear in the beginning that I'm still going to ask them to do hard things, although I want this internship to be successful. I also want it to be to develop skills while they're doing this. So I think I don't necessarily give the hardest clients, but I don't give the easiest clients, however. And I also know I let both clients know and interns know of what the expectations are of an intern, an MSW placement intern, like what their skills are, what skills they're developing. I also let interns interface as much as possible with other clinicians doing the work, if that makes sense, so that they're watching multiple people doing it and maybe not doing it themselves. And so that, especially in that first semester, that the learning process is a lot about viewing, watching, and then we're going to move to modeling and working more independently. Um, I was thinking when I was preparing for this, I had my own experience as an intern many years ago where a supervisor had to protect me from a client that was, it was a different situation, that she was like, okay, this person was totally out of bounds with you, and I think I know why. And really, and having that example of someone going to bat for me in a slightly different way, really has informed my experience as a supervisor, and I'm eternally grateful for being defended in the way that supervisor did.
And Beth.
Yeah. How I balance encouraging student growth and gatekeeping really comes down to, again, like noticing the students' willingness to take feedback and to learn and grow from that. Jenny had talked about being really upfront about being able to make mistakes. Social workers are not perfect. We are going to make mistakes. I've been doing this for a very long time and I'm still making mistakes. But I still talk about those things in supervision. So I think, encouraging growth includes trying to gain some insight about why did I make that decision? What went wrong with that decision? It's okay that that decision didn't land. I'm going to circle back with the client. I'm going to do this, that, or the other. So that I expect. And when I'm working with a student and they're not open to feedback and they don't have any interest in understanding that whole process, then my, red flag goes up and I think, okay, so this person is not um, interested in growing and that could harm a client. So that's when I'm like, okay, we have a problem.
Thanks. And then Jamie, from your liaison perspective, what are some challenges that you have encountered balancing kind of our school's role in gatekeeping along with supporting student learning?
Yeah, so I think the one thing, right, is that I don't always necessarily, as you had talked earlier, right? There's kind of the two different sides of the story, the student side, and then maybe also, the internship side, what other that supervision is, and then really like figuring out like where is the issue? Because sometimes the issue is with the supervisor too, right? And what the student is telling me. So are the expectations too high for the student and they're not meeting the expectations? And so kind of figuring that out, I think. Um, and I also see that, sometimes my bias of what I'm seeing students as far as classroom work of what they're doing it may not be the same of what they're doing in practice, right? So I really have to step back and sometimes think, how are those coming in? Because even when I do site visits, like it might be a minor problem, but for me, I'm seeing a major problem. And how do I balance those two things and not also putting my bias on the agency of saying, are you seeing this or do you have these concerns? So I think I sometimes struggle of when do I reach out to the site and say, are you having these concerns with a student? Because they just might not be really doing well in the classroom, but they're doing really good on site. So I think that's where I struggle with the gatekeeping part of it.
And then Katie, the question I want to ask you, and this could be about, the placement that you problem solve with or current placement, what is your experience like as a student, kind of both being supported and evaluated at the same time?
So I will say that I wholeheartedly felt supported the, the entire process last semester um, by the school and by Jamie was my field liaison. But I did not feel supported by my placement. And because it was employment based, again, that just added an extra layer. And then that evaluation, that gatekeeping, I felt stuck. And that is a feeling that I don't like anywhere in my life is feeling stuck or complacent. Um, but the support that I received from the school and the staff and the faculty was amazing, like working through each of these steps. And Jamie was very straightforward with me, like, like if something happens, like you might have to redo field, this semester if it comes to that. And that was a realization I had to come to. And it was a hard one for me. But support was there. And then the gatekeeping was just from like the employment side, really.
Thank you. And that, it transitions really well to this question that, I'm kind of interested in any of your perspectives. And so maybe if you as panelists, if you want to raise your hand, if you want to take this one on, and then I'll call you, but just kind of want to ask, like, how do you address that fear, whether it's yours or your students, about kind of the possible consequences of bringing up a problem?
I'll just say that I talk about it in my own supervision, right? Like If I notice that I am reluctant to have a hard conversation with a student, then I know I've got a problem and I need to figure that out with my own supervision.
I also want to say too, I think kind of even coming back to Katie is I really make this practice oriented and thinking in regards to talking about consequences and choices, right? Because this is also teaching our students that they're working with clients who have consequences and choices to make too. And so even though, right, they're going through a difficult time of their own, like really looking at that perspective of what they're sometimes also asking clients to do. And so how do you kind of manage that? And really, what are they taking away from this? And really also coming back to this, that, we are here, this is part of your education, but as Katie has said, right? Yes, it's a consequence of you like have to step back, but it's not necessarily the worst thing that's going to happen to you either, right? That sometimes like to really like normalize, they're not the only ones that have gone through this because I think sometimes they feel like they're on this island. So having that approach, right? Like we've been there before. Sometimes life happens, like we have to kind of just move forward and how do we do that and also see the other side of that. But part of it too is tying it back to that right of self-determination. You can choose to address this issue or you suffer through it. Like that is the other thing, right? And so again, I think just for me, sometimes it's really relating it back to those core concepts and having them think about it from that true social work perspective that they should be kind of living and experiencing.
Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, so just kind of like going off of what Jamie said, like the possible consequences and I know some of the conversations I had with her through the process was like what was really important to me. Was it something that I could work through for 8 or 9 months until practicum was over, or if it was something that I felt I needed to stand on business. And for me, it was something ethical for me and just something that I personally believed in. And then that's when she explained, like, well, this is what could happen. And I was like, well, if it does, it does. But I'm not the type of person to just let something go by the wayside because it could be happening to other people. It could have happened or continue to in the future, and I don't think that that's okay. So it was scary to say the least in my situation, very scary, but I made it through and now we're on the other side.
I want to give other people here on the training an opportunity to ask questions. I have more, I can keep going, but I wanted to pause for a second and see if there are questions
So,
any of you would like to ask.
Lindsay, as I have a bunch of people here who are field instructors, and it's kind of one of those areas I struggled as Beth and I were talking a little bit even at the beginning. I think I struggle, like when do I really reach out to a field instructor? And I will also say, the other area I struggle, and I think I've learned this week, is when I do site visits, I ask about problems and I don't get responses most of the time, but then I learn after the fact that there was a problem. So I'm trying to really navigate from my field faculty liaison. How do I really encourage for those problems to be discussed when I really, as you all said, you have 1 hour a week. I'm always here. I'm always seeing students, but with all of my field instructors, I have like maybe 1 hour a semester that I'm really touching base with everyone. So if anyone has suggestions on how I really navigate, especially in that site visit, how to bring up problems, or if there's a better question for me to ask, I would really appreciate that feedback. Maybe not today, but if you don't have it at this moment, at any time.
I think just a little bit of what you just said. I often hear about problems later. I'm here today, humbly asking for, are there challenges that you've seen in this internship? Because I think, or even a pre-warning, hey, here are some things that, and again, I know you're a very busy person, but here are some things that I want to focus on. And we know, but I love getting that bullet pointed reminder. Any opportunities for growth is always a great, twist to problems. But yeah, just bringing up just the way you did right now sounds good to me, honestly.
As a newer field supervisor, um, I wasn't sure kind of what to expect with when I first started the field visits. So I wasn't sure how to be prepared properly for those other outside of, the paperwork that we send in. Um, So if there's like some things that we can do to prepare specifically for those visits, if there's problems, do you want us to kind of think ahead on like some strengths, some areas where we've specifically seen growth and encourage that? Because I feel like sometimes in the moment you can't remember specific examples, but I think it's an opportunity, especially in those site visits, to like really cheer on the good things that our students are doing and mention them and make them known, because that might not come across specifically in the midterm or specifically in the final evaluation, but it is something to make mention of. So that would be helpful for me. I mean, it doesn't have to be specific on, oh, this student, this or that, but just something generic or basic so that we can be prepared for you and know kind of what to expect.
I appreciate that also to the second in the chat. So it is good. And I just to kind of chime back to that, I think I sometimes forget, right, who is new, who is seasoned, and I kind of sometimes go in with my own agenda and need to kind of be mindful of that. So I appreciate that.
That's really wonderful feedback for us. Thank you. Other questions that people have for our panelists?
For you guys who are external, so I am an external remote supervisor for my students. And how are you guys interacting or utilizing the task supervisors to your benefit? Since you don't see them but every once in a while in the meeting, so it's hard to kind of gauge. So how are you utilizing those task instructors?
That's a great question. Um, in the past, I have been really um, I've communicated with them pretty frequently. We meet before the placement starts on Zoom, and then, every once in a while I'll send an email, how are things going? And then we have the site visit, which gives me more opportunity. But I will say this academic year, I have not been in touch with the actual site supervisor. For some different reasons, and I feel like it's giving me oh, Beth, you really should have been in touch with this person more frequently. I think I did it because I had felt some resistance on the part of the student to reaching out to this person, and that should have been a red flag for me. So just going back to that, like, hey, we're human, we make mistakes. But that's how I stay in touch. And I used to let them know, let's stay in touch. This is going to be a regular thing. This isn't a sign of a problem. So hopefully that answers your question.
So I will say, for me, I share my supervision schedule with my site supervisor and encourage them if they could be on even for part of the meetings at any time when I'm doing them. To even, if they've talked about something that they want feedback on, or they want to have a discussion, or they are having a concern. And sometimes it has happened, sometimes it hasn't. But when it's not happening, then I can it's a good reminder for me to send an email and be like, hey, what's going on? So that's kind of, I've really encouraged that the past couple years when I've had a site supervisor is it's being part of my meeting, knowing that it's not their priority, but it's helpful to me. And I think the other thing is too, when the assessments are due, because they don't necessarily have to participate in them. And if I see that they've just kind of skipped over them, I kind of do reach out at that point and say, like, hey, I've maybe not seen this area, or, I'm not sure about this. Do you have any feedback? Because I think that there's sometimes that I'll be honest, in my supervision, Beth had talked about maybe not having the full hour. Sometimes we go well over and I never get to a topic. And I feel like at the end, can I really assess this? But I know they're doing it in field. So I just need the feedback. And I kind of just really direct it like, I need help with this. What have you seen? And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, but that's helpful. And not overwhelming to them that they have to do that whole assessment. Because I know for all of us, that assessment is overwhelming. So.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions that any of you here have for our panelists?
So I want to share with all of you, especially who have students who are in the advanced placement, and Katie can talk about this maybe a little bit too, that we talk about the tough conversations. It is something that I'm going to build into the class going forward as I hear this more, but they do a section on conflict resolution, which I don't think they always see problems as conflict in their space. And a lot of times it is a conflict, right? It's either an internal conflict of them bringing it forward, or they're afraid of the conflict that's going to happen when they have the discussion. So they all do an exercise to kind of learn how they deal with conflict. And it's always very eye-opening when I read their assessments and what it is. But I don't know how much that gets carried over to their placement. So just for you to also be mindful when we're talking about bringing coursework into it, like that's something they're doing. And I challenge them to also like have their field instructors do it with them sometimes and like see where they are. We talk about I was on a meeting this morning and they were talking how they did their disc surveys as a team, right, to see who they are. And sometimes those are things like when there's a problem too, like we're just not the same person, right? We look at things different. And so, and I've used some of those things in past, like color wheels, disc assessments, right? When there's a conflict and we just can't get to the bottom of it. But that conflict one might be a good one too to kind of think about.
Thank you. And so we're getting to the end of time. I wanted to see if there's anything that any of our panelists wanted to add as last thoughts. Katie, it looked like maybe you had something to say.
Yeah, I was just gonna like bounce off what Jamie said before I had to jump off. But yeah, the conflict resolution. I know for me, I can put a lot on paper and talk about how I'm going to do all these things. And then when it came to it, it was difficult. I think mine had some internal and external. I think the internal for me was stronger. It was a bigger part of the problem and the process that we were doing. And so um, really like reflecting on that and learning what's important to me as a student and going forward with my career as a social worker. And then using the process going forward, like we talked about documentation earlier. A lot that what hurt me was before my placement started, a lot of conversations were had phone calls and in person, and there was not emails, there was no documentation. And so then it was all just kind of on me against basically my entire employer. So that made it difficult. So I've learned a lot from it is always send an email. Always, always, always.
Beth or Jenny, any last thoughts that you have in closing? Well, thank you very much. Let's see. I am going to put up, let's see if I can do it again. I have an evaluation. If you have a chance to do it now, I will also email it out later. We'll get CEUs out in the next few days. And I sent the slides in advance, but we'll follow up. We'll send the evaluation out again. But if you have a chance, this question we put on here, and I don't know if you have any thoughts now or anything you want to share with us. Like I asked on the evaluation, like, were you familiar with our problem-solving process before this training? And then I also was kind of curious, like, if any of you have thoughts on how we can do a better job of sharing this process with our field supervisors so that they are aware.
Thanks, Katie. I also dropped the survey into the chat just so that it's easier to hit that link for anybody, but
Yeah.
I'd say as
Thank you.
someone who's been through the problem solving process, just demystifying it that it isn't, it's tough. And Katie spoke a little, it's tough, but you'll come out the other side. The staff at the school were just so, helpful, and it was seamless and smooth, even as we were discussing hard things. So, demystifying, talking about more and more, people can share personal experiences as willing is helpful for me.
I just want to say that I've been through the problem process with the faculty more times than I care to admit. Um, and it has been really supportive. And and my toughest one is one that I'm dealing with right now where the student didn't perceive that there was a problem. And that was it's like I didn't know what to do, and the site supervisor didn't recognize the problem. Um, and then I started to think maybe it's me, maybe there isn't a problem, but apparently there was because we're progressing through the process. And I think that the end result for this student is I'm afraid that she's beginning to realize that social work may not be her profession, and she has a boatload of student loans for a degree that she may never use. Um, so I'm sort of glad that I did it. Until, because that got her thinking. But, it was weird because she didn't think there was a problem.
yeah, and I will just I just talk about that too. I think sometimes too, right, is that sometimes when we talked about even that mismatch of expectations, I think students sometimes pick the environment if they can that they're safe in and comfortable in too, and they don't see the problem because that agency maybe is not carrying those social work values and things that they need. So as you had even said, right, like she has a degree, but she was in an environment that really may not have also been supporting social work, even though they're doing social work. Because I think that's sometimes too where the problem is, right? Is agencies who are doing social work, but they're not living the values and things of social work. And then students are hearing it from us all the time and pushing it. And they're like, there's no problem because I'm happy and comfortable over here. But we're like, but you're not living those values and ethics that you should be. So I think it happens. It happens infrequently, but as we all talk in the field program, like unfortunately, field is where we see students have issues and it ends up so late in their education. And sometimes it feels very uncomfortable for all of us, but that's what happens. And it is where we gatekeep sometimes, unfortunately. So
Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate everything you all do in your partnership. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all. Bye bye.